Hi, I'm Brendan Bushy.
And hi, I'm Nick Maggio.
So, Nick, you had a suggested title for tonight.
Yes, I did.
What was your suggested title?
My suggested title was a play on a awesome Journey song, Don't Stop Believin'.
Okay. And why? What made you think of that song for this?
I guess, ahead of our having the conversation here now on the recording, we were talking about how we were going to talk about the law, the state of the law, um, with especially within the context of what's going on with Jack Smith, ahead of Trump taking the presidency. And within that context, one of the phrases that popped into my mind that I kept hearing in light of all the news around Trump, his convictions, and these Jack Smith cases are legal commentators, legal professionals saying, I still believe in the rule of law. Um, Usually that's being said, as a criticism of some of the actions that are taking place. And what occurred to me when I hear people say that is that maybe it's self-evident, but the rule of law doesn't exist independent of us. It's something that we have to believe in. It's something we have to act out. And when we don't believe in it, when we don't act it out, it ceases to exist. So my suggestion, don't stop believing, was in some ways a call to action among people to not stop believing in the rule of law because the moment you do, it stops existing.
I'll get back to that in a minute. My suggestion, which I'm going to go with, is the only thing we know. And where I got that from is there's all kinds of things flying around, right? All kinds of commentary, all kinds of reporting. Um, I talked to your grandpa today, and he told me he was watching some things and he wanted, perspective. I said, "Why are you watching the news?" And he said, "What do I have better to do?" I said, "Why don't you play some music?" Um,
Yeah.
I guess where I was going with that is we don't know what's going to happen when, and even if Donald Trump gets sworn in as president again. We don't know if he's going to end up with the appointments he makes. We don't know if they're going to be able to do the things they're talking about. We don't know any of that. So the only thing we really do know right now, okay, at least that's pertinent for me, that is recent, is in the last couple of days, and that's what I'd like these videos to be about, what's happening right now, is that it looks like Jack Smith is withdrawing the cases against Donald Trump. And I may be wrong with withdrawing, but it sure looks like that. And also, it looks like the uh, New York State courts are going to drop the ball in terms of sentencing Trump for the crimes he was convicted of. So that's what we know. And I think that's the most important thing happening right now. What does that mean um, going forward? And we know not too long ago, the Supreme Court came out with some rulings regarding presidential immunity. And as I read those, and we talked about that, the um, it doesn't let Trump off the hook for crimes he commits while in office. It's basically saying if he's, layman's terms, as I understand it, if he's performing his duties and he's making the best decisions he can, he's immune. Unless, of course, he crosses into some other territory, right? Like it's not a part of his official duties to incite an insurrection.
Well, maybe it is, in light of the things that are going on. Um, yeah, I mean, my understanding of the latest news on Jack Smith is that he's moving to dismiss um unopposed the two federal cases against Trump being the documents case. Well, the documents case had already been dismissed by Eileen Cannon, but he was set to appeal those, and so now it seems as if he's no longer going to pursue or officially withdrawing that appeal. And then you have the DC case for the insurrection, which he's moving to dismiss, which I believe should be unopposed by Trump's defense team. And then, yeah, the New York case, he was convicted of those crimes in New York State. There's no federal pardon that could wash away that conviction. It would take a pardon from the New York State governor to do that. So those convictions will stand. But from what I understand, the judge in that case came out and said that he would be indefinitely postponing the sentencing there.
Hey, you're an attorney, Nick, and you were a prosecutor,
Right.
and you're also working now as a clerk in a federal district court.
Right.
What do you do? I mean, just what's your job ultimately as a clerk at a federal district court?
I guess the most concise way is just legal research and writing.
Okay. And since it's a federal court, is most of your legal research around constitutionality, or is that just a part of it?
It's a part of it. Sometimes it's just federal statutes.
Okay. And you were, when you were in law school, you were editor of Law Review,
Right.
and you wrote a piece for the Law Review.
Two. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I'm talking about your first one. What was the thesis of your first piece?
The thesis of the first piece was that the DOJ's Office of Legal Counsel's policy that you could not indict a sitting president was a bad policy.
Was it law?
No, it was a department policy.
Okay, so then I'm going to ask you for an opinion on our Constitution. Is there anything in the Constitution that bars indicting, trying, convicting a sitting president of crimes he commits while in office?
No.
Is there anything in New York State law, and you're in New York State,
Right.
anything you know about that says, hey, we got to drop our felony convictions against sitting presidents or soon to be sitting presidents?
No.
Okay. So I just, this is what I think is the only thing worth talking about now, aside from everything else everybody's talking about and regurgitating, and that
Right.
is that Trump has gotten away with it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that these actions by Jack Smith send the message that criminal accountability is like a game of tag or it's a race. And that there's a point you could reach where you're no longer subject to the rules of the game. Right? I mean, like, our or maybe it's just the new rule of the game. The new rule is once you get to this point, you're free to commit crimes. Which just kind of flies in the face of just basic principles of criminal law. One of the things that I didn't write about in my note that I wish I had, but I guess we could discuss here is even the idea that, part of the rationale behind the OLC's opinion about how you can't indict a sitting president is that to do so would be so debilitating to the government that just as a policy consideration, we're not going to do it, meaning to subject somebody to an indictment, criminal process, to subpoenas, to comply with those would be so onerous that it's just bad policy to allow that to happen. Well, if the aim of this policy was to ensure effective governance, I don't know what would be more debilitating to effective governance than having a perceived criminal at the seat of our government. And I don't know what would better serve good governance than removing a perceived criminal from the seat of our government. So I regret not having written that in my note, but I mean, if you just sit with the idea of that opinion of that policy for a second, it's like all it's serving to do is enable a criminal to wield the most powerful office, arguably that our government has. Um, and I think we're seeing the effects of that with Trump being a New York State convicted felon for fraud charges, being under indictment twice for stealing national secrets, and inciting a violent insurrection to disrupt our government. And now, because he won a plurality of the popular vote and over 270 electoral votes, he gets to not face any consequences for that.
Pretty grim.
Yeah, yeah, it is pretty grim. Thank God for federalism. I mean, like, thankfully we have a system in place where our states can act with some degree of sovereignty, where, New York State convictions can still stand, where certain rights that people enjoy are still protected within certain states, because otherwise, it would be even grimmer, I guess.
Well, I've spent the last year kind of researching and studying our history. And part of that was to study other countries' histories when it came to autocracy and totalitarianism. And where I'm at is pretty grim because I don't think there's anything at this point. You're saying thank God for federalism, but New York State just walked away from holding Trump accountable for felonies. And he's
Right.
not, um, what's the word I want to say? He's not a perceived felon. He's an actual felon, right? He's been convicted.
Oh, right, sure. In the context of Trump, yeah, he's a convicted felon.
Okay. So I don't know. I think this is the overriding thing in terms of governance in this country today. I don't know what will happen after he's appointed. I read today or saw today that he's going to appoint Jared Kushner's father as ambassador of France. And Jared Kushner's father was convicted by Chris Christie when Chris Christie was a federal prosecutor and was in jail. And then he was ultimately pardoned by Donald Trump.
He's
I think there are some other people he's bringing into, planning to bring into the cabinet who have been convicted um, of other things or have certainly been involved in other things, such as rape,
Yeah.
sexual abuse, drug dealing, things of that nature. I don't think I can recall ever seeing um, a state of what I would consider lawlessness uh, during my lifetime, a
Right,
state of
right.
lawlessness which exists right now.
Yeah. I mean, on that topic of lawlessness, I think one of the things that this story about Jack Smith typifies, which I think was a through line in this last national election, was this gripe that people seemed to have with the Democratic Party is that they're essentially rule followers. That, when it comes to matters of national importance, Democrats stand on ceremony and rules, and all with the idea that, well, if we can't do this particular thing because if we do it, then the other side's just going to abuse it. I'm thinking of things like the filibuster, where when they had control of the Senate, they didn't want to get rid of the filibuster because they thought that, well, then Republicans will just abuse it when they get into power. Um, you know, or and the reason I bring that up is because the Republican Party, as far as I've seen, doesn't play by the rules. So it's like you're trying to play a game, you're trying to play tag, and when you tag the person you tag takes out a shotgun and blows your leg off. And now you say, well, you really can't do that, so we're going to try this round again. And when I tag you, all you could do is tag me back with your hand. And the guy says, I got it. I'm not going to do it. So then he pulls out a handgun and he shoots you in your other. Like you're engaging with somebody who doesn't care about the rules you're trying to abide by. Um, and you see that time after time. I mean, the most recent headline that's been circulating is Trump considering doing recess appointments, or was trying at least to do recess appointments, absolutely subverting the advise and consent role of the Senate. So you see things like this, and it's just been time after time of that with Republicans and Merrick Garland. I mean, we're talking about the DOJ and Merrick Garland refusing to even give him a hearing when Obama was president and put him up for a seat on the Supreme Court. Yet in the next cycle, when Trump was president, held appointments during Trump's or held hearings during Trump's lame duck session to get his Supreme Court appointee through. And so, this idea that, as we were saying earlier, there's no constitutional provision that precludes Jack Smith from prosecuting Trump. There's no federal statutory provision that precludes him from prosecuting Trump. It's just a DOJ policy. And I say just because that's not necessarily binding. Jack Smith is an independent counsel. In theory, he's supposed to be operating independently of Merrick Garland. And so this is just, I think, another instance where I hate to say that I hate to equate Jack Smith to an extension of the Democratic Party, but at least the sentiment is there where it's like, we understand you guys are following some sort of rule book, but you're playing by an outdated set of rules. The rules are no longer applicable in these situations. And as a consequence of that, now we're going to have a criminal, a convicted criminal at the seat of our federal government.
Well, the people seem to want him.
Not a majority of them.
No, but a majority of those who voted.
I suppose so. I suppose so.
That's another issue. But
Right.
so I just, you know, you and I have had go rounds about the rule of law. Um,
Yeah.
I think it's a delusion.
Right.
And I think it's never been more obvious than right now.
Right.
But there were certainly plenty of indicators, right, that it wasn't really there. Zimmerman kills Trayvon Martin, an unarmed kid, and is
Right.
acquitted because self-defense. That other kid goes out of state, gets a semi-automatic that he's not supposed to have, kills somebody, and the judge rules, you know, that they can't be tried on that.
Right.
And there's been all kinds of things coming up steadily indicating that there's no accountability. When Mueller was conducting his investigation, he came out with, I don't remember if it was 9 or 11 documented instances of obstruction of justice.
Right.
And the Democrats didn't even take the time to launch impeachment based upon those. Those were
Right.
just, well, oh, it was just obstruction of justice.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't have a lot of confidence in the rule of law. And I don't think you can reach an agreement with someone who's dishonest.
Right.
I think if someone's lying, you're a fool to try to reach an agreement with them.
Right.
It- um, and in terms of the law, the only people who obey the law are people who have a value for it. People who don't have a value for the law don't obey the law.
Right.
So
Right.
the law, the only people adhering or attempting to adhere to the law are people who value it. But there's all these other people who don't value it at all.
Well, even on that, I think it goes a bit beyond that because it's not for me, it's not enough to just value the law, right? Because I think that what we've seen with the Republican Party is that they do value the law, but they value it in the same way, a serial killer might value a gun, in that it's something that they use that they wield like a cudgel or some other weapon to achieve political outcomes for themselves. And I mainly see this within the context of voting rights cases where they're constantly suing and moving to purge people of voter rolls, make it harder to vote, to restrict voting rights for people, and even outside of that context, to just restrict rights for people and to make it easier for corporations to funnel money into elections, right? I mean, so they value the law. They just have a value for it to serve their political ends. They don't value it to the extent that the law should be a set of rules where people can um, get redress for violations of their rights for wrongs done to them to equal the playing field in some respect. They use it as a way to just kind of repress, suppress, divide, and attack people. Um, so yeah, I guess I agree with you. I agree with the sentiment. I guess for me, it's not enough to just value the law, but you have to have a positive value for the law. You have to view it as something that the everyday person can use and can protect them from the abuses of big corporations and government.
You know, I don't want to belabor what I'm about to say, but I'll just mention it. The other day, I had a total disaster here dealing with a large bank, Ally Bank. And I was opening up a CD and I was dealing with several people there. And they were all telling me, oh, this is how you do this. This is what you do. This is what you can do. And four in a row who were very nice gave me totally wrong information.
Right.
So I ended up opening up the CD, but I could only fund it for half the amount I wanted to fund it for because
Oh,
they gave me wrong information that I won't get into.
right.
And then I finally get a supervisor, and she's like, it doesn't matter what they said, they were simply wrong. And I was like, okay, well, where's the accountability here? I said, I've suffered a consequence. Where is the accountability on your side of the street here?
Right.
And this is not about some abstract thing. I mean, one of the highest priorities we have is money, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was talking about a lot of money.
Sure.
And she was telling me go scratch.
Jeez.
And then I got another supervisor who was very nice, and she really tried. She tried with all her heart to fix things, and she couldn't do it. And I came away from that, and I called up. There were two agencies. I called up federal agencies. I don't remember the name. I had to look them up. One regulates banks. So I
Okay.
called them up to make a complaint, and the guy told me, "What's the name of the bank?" I told him, he said, "No, we don't regulate that bank. You have to call this agency." So I called another agency, and a woman came on and she said, "What's the name of the institution?" I told her, she said, "Yeah." She said, "You can make a complaint." I said, "Okay." And then she starts to explain the process. And I said, "I've been on the phone for hours with all concerned. Before I get into another long conversation, what can you do?
Right.
What can your agency do, right, to hold people accountable for misinformation?" And she said, "Well, we can take your complaint, we can send it to them. And if they respond, we can let them know what we think." And I said, "Okay." And suppose, just to make this short as possible, they tell you to go pound sand. She said,
Right.
"Oh, well, then you could possibly um, find an attorney and take them to court." And I thought, this is regulation. Okay, so
Right.
you're overseeing a large national financial institution, and all you can do if you determine that they've done something wrong is ask them not to do it. And if they don't, all you can do is tell the person that they've harmed that they have a right to go sue them.
Right. Yeah. It's like,
I,
thanks.
yeah. So I didn't file a complaint because there does not seem to be any accountability, but I don't think that's something new. I think it's simply a matter of degree. But I think the matter of degree has reached a point where we've crossed a threshold. People talk about tipping points, crossed a threshold, a tipping point, whatever. But we're now willing to accept that the President of the United States can commit a crime while in office and not be held accountable.
Right.
And the crime could be insurrection,
Right.
it could be sabotage, or it could be treason in a sense, right?
Yeah.
Um, which is what Mueller's investigation was about, Trump's involvement with Russia.
Yeah.
Um, and the obstruction of justice came up because Mueller could not complete the investigation on Russia because he was obstructed by Trump and
Yeah.
members of Trump's immediate circle. Um, I don't see us coming back from this. I don't know where we go, but I don't see us coming back from it. I think irreparable harm has been done to our confidence, our belief in government or in law. I never had a really great belief, But now I feel like, okay, so maybe the rest of you are going to wake up to what I realized earlier.
Right.
I'm not happy about that. I take no pleasure in being right if I'm right. But what do you do? Other countries where things like this have happened have not come back. That was the beginning of the end.
Right.
And the other thing is the thing I think, um, which has been dogging us from the start, from the very formation of the country, has been political corruption.
Yeah.
So I think, it's like a seesaw. When the corruption reaches like this level, right?
Yeah. It doesn't come back.
It doesn't come back. You know,
Yeah.
you can't even get someone on the other end of the seesaw because it's
Right.
straight up in the air.
Right.
So that's where I'm at. But that's all I wanted to just touch base. So you're confident that a sitting president or a soon to be president or a former president can be indicted for crimes they commit.
I think they should be. The only reason I pause is because well, when I was a prosecutor, there was a case that I knew about where um a law enforcement officer off duty had gone to a bar, and while he was there, he needed to use the bathroom. And so he went to go to the bathroom, and someone was in it. It was occupied. And so he knocked on the door to the bathroom. And after he did that, but before the person had come out, he drew his firearm, he drew his service weapon, and he aimed it adjacent to the door. So if you were stepping out of the bathroom, you would see the side of his gun, and he was aiming it down a hall. And based on how that person reacted, this person was in the law enforcement officer was in plain clothes. And so all they saw was some guy with a gun. And the person ducks under the gun, who comes out of the bathroom, ducks under the gun, runs away. And the law enforcement officer enters the bathroom, ostensibly uses it, and then leaves as if nothing happens. That girl who left the bathroom went and told her friends. Somebody called the police. The place evacuates because they hear reports of a guy with a gun. Police officers fly over to assess the situation. They figure out what happened. They arrest the guy. He's charged. And there came a point in time where a decision had to be made about whether to charge this individual with a felony, criminal possession of a weapon, under New York state law, with possessing a firearm with the intent to use it unlawfully, namely using a firearm for the purpose of intimidating or scaring somebody. And under New York state law, um, it is prohibited legally from charging a cop with unlawfully using a firearm. So even if they're off duty, and even if that firearm was used in service of an unlawful purpose, um, and so there were some intense discussions going on around whether or not to charge the officer with that anyway, as a prosecutor, not as a cop, but as a prosecutor to charge them with that anyway, and let the and make a shot at trying to reform the law. Because the decision that had come out, um, and declared that rule had come out a while ago, and we thought that there were good arguments to be made to go to try and change the landscape of the law. And so when I see these stories about Jack Smith, that story pops into my mind that, as an attorney, you're not simply there to just follow the rules. You are an advocate, and you can advocate for the status quo, or you can advocate for changing something, especially when the status quo is hurting people and not in service of, those ideals that we always pretended we lived up to. Um, so I guess, yeah, there's not a lot of things to look at right now that are inspiring hope, but if that's the case, I'd like to think that there could be those things that inspire our hope if we just simply went out and did those things and tried to be those things.
You brought up an interesting thing. First of all, I didn't know that that was the law in New York State, but that's not the law in the United States. The federal government, there's no law, there's nothing in the Constitution or federal law that says you can't indict a sitting president.
Right,
So, unlike the police officer who has the law saying, or it's written, you can't indict him for doing something with his gun, um, I guess maybe if the officer was brought into court in an attempt to bring this forward to see if they could change things and pulled out a gun and shot the judge, maybe then there would be have been some action. I'm sorry, I just couldn't resist that. But there is a difference. There's nothing in the federal law to stop anyone from indicting the president.
right,
Um, the other thing, which you touch on, it gets to personal integrity,
right.
right? The book I read, or just one of the books I just finished reading, was about the trial of Adolf Eichmann. Um, it was held in Israel. It was like 10 years after the Nuremberg trials were over. Eichmann was captured in, I think, Argentina, and he was brought out of Argentina, smuggled out by Israelis, brought into Israel, and he was tried for his crimes. And Eichmann um, was really responsible for routing of trains, getting um, Jews herded, concentrated, moved to facilities where they were killed.
Right.
Right. So, and he was really good at it. So he facilitated the deaths of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, given the area where he was working in. Um, and he was found guilty and he was hung. But Hannah Arendt, I think I'm probably killing the last name, she wrote about this trial.
Right.
And if I understood her, and she's very sophisticated and she's worth reading, she said there was a whole, maybe I'm using my word, she compared this to kabuki theater.
Right.
Right? It was like they're talking about having to prove his intent.
Yeah.
Was he anti-Semitic or was he just a bureaucrat trying to get ahead in the bureaucracy? Um,
Yeah.
when it gets to that level, it's absurd.
Right.
Our laws got to that level a long time ago. And I think that the prosecutors, um, I think prosecutors have been too willing to defer to their supervisors or their agencies. Now, I don't know what would have happened with Jack Smith if he said, I ain't dropping this, right?
Right.
They could have removed him from his position. I guess he could be fired. And that would be an embarrassment. But then they would be having the responsibility for stopping this from going forward. When he does it, when he takes the action that he believes he's supposed to take, given the agency he's working in, he's taking the responsibility for stopping it.
Yeah.
So I think that what we have is a country where accountability means nothing, and people's um, desire to have a job or hold a job trumps everything else.
Right.
Um, I, I really, I know I'm repeating myself, but I think this is what's going on right now with these cases being withdrawn or dismissed is major problem. And the other thing is I would like to see it go forward, but it'd be interesting to see what would happen on appeals when this got to Supreme Court
Well,
because Those folks they're making it even easier for people not to be held accountable.
And if I had to speculate, which I guess I do, because it's not going forward, I'd imagine there if we had Jack Smith here and we asked him, how come you're going about it this way? Part of the reason I think he would offer is that he saw what happened in the documents case, in that, he brought the national securities documents case in Florida in front of Eileen Cannon. Um, while that was pending, there was the immunity case before the Supreme Court. And in that case, the court laid out the rules that it did around official versus unofficial versus quasi-official conduct. But then Clarence Thomas took it upon himself to opine on an issue not even before the court, namely the constitutionality of Jack Smith being a special counsel, um, which was an argument raised in the documents case before Eileen Cannon. And, Justice Thomas was essentially like, for anybody who's potentially curious about this issue, here's what the Supreme Court thinks about this, right? In a non-binding, unpresented question before the court. And Eileen Cannon used that as a justification to dismiss the documents case. So I think part of what Jack Smith is doing is some sort of strategic litigation wherein he doesn't want to give the Supreme Court, higher courts, the opportunity to set bad rules of law, so that in the future there's some bad precedent to overcome. At least now the legal landscape is that whatever bad precedent the court might create doesn't exist. So that's not a hurdle to overcome. But at the end of the day, I mean, there's there's bad precedent to the extent that you allow a president to a criminal president to be in office, right? I mean, so I think he probably just looked at the legal landscape. When you look at an unfavorable court, that probably isn't going to rule in your favor. When you look at an executive branch, which would be responsible for enforcing any decision that isn't going to enforce a decision against itself, it's like, what exactly do you have left? I'd imagine that would probably be some form of his argument. Um,
Why do you have a need to go there?
what's that?
Why do you have a need to go there? This is all hypothesis.
Right. Yeah, it's all hypothesis and
Right.
speculation.
I think here's where you and I differ. Okay. I have no problem looking at the state of affairs and looking at our law, our legal system, and saying it's all bullshit.
Right.
You're a practicing attorney. I think there's a built-in hesitancy making a statement like that. And I don't want you to make it, by the way. I'm just saying, simply because this is what you do. What happens if you cross the street and you're sitting with me and you're saying this law is bullshit? Well, how do you go forward as an attorney? So I think you're coming up with a rationale for Jack Smith. But I think that shows your degree of creativity. I think,
Sure. Yeah.
I really think, in response to what you were saying, that Jack Smith's obligation, if he took his oath of office seriously, would be to go forward with the prosecution. And if someone else kills the prosecution, then it's on them. But he's killing the prosecution. He's letting them do it. He's not standing up and asserting himself. He's not advocating for the law.
Yeah. And I think it also, on personal integrity, you said it's also a question of, and maybe one's related to the other, but personal ethics too. I was rereading Snyder's book on tyranny. And one of the last chapters that he has in there is something to the effect of, value professional ethics. And he wrote this short essay about how when you look at the atrocities that were carried out in Nazi Germany, you had attorneys that were giving legal opinions to justify a number of the actions of the Nazi Party. You had doctors that were crafting and devising procedures and experiments that did harm to people. all in the service of exterminating, 6 million some odd Jews and gypsies and other folks. And so, he makes this line, and I'm gonna butcher it, but it's essentially that, the importance of following professional ethics is that those are the rules you're supposed to follow when it's uncomfortable, when it's not easy.
Right.
Um, and it's certainly in times like we are in now that following the professional ethics of upholding the Constitution, of upholding the rule of law, of holding people accountable, might not be easy. When you have a majority of the voting public wanting Trump in office, when you have an incoming hostile administration, when you have a hostile Supreme Court, but it's like that's the job you took,
Right.
right? So it's to some extent, it's just like be a professional about it.
On that, I think we should we should stop.
All right.
Thanks, Dave. Stick around for a minute, okay?
All right.
The so I don't know what our next topic will be, but um we're both in agreement that withdrawing these cases probably doesn't serve us as a nation.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay. All right. And that would be a big current pressing problem, don't you
I
think?
think so. Yeah,
Okay. All right. Thanks, Nick. Hang
you
in
got
there.
it. Take
I'll
care.
stop this recording. Take care.